Okay, so we reached the final presentation of the day, and we changed the slides on the side as well. It's been a couple of years that Lisa and I have been trying to get Laura Penhaul to come along and speak at one of our events. We actually went to college together down in Cornwall, and we took very different paths thereafter. I went the direction I did, and Laura went on to be the lead physician in the Paralympics in London 2012, in Rio 2016, with the British ski team in Vancouver, I believe. She also helped to manage the successful navigation, if you like, or pedal around the globe in 80 days by a chap called Mark Beaumont, which is a fascinating story in itself and wouldn't have been possible without Laura there to glue his teeth back in a couple of days into the journey. And then she, of course, conceptualized this crazy idea, created the plan, and led the team to be the first ever all-female crew, called the Coxless Crew, to row across the Pacific Ocean from the northern part of California to Australia. So whilst doing all of that, as if that wasn't enough, she also chose to record a documentary. So we'll take a little look and then we'll welcome Laura onto the stage.
There's an incredible insight to be gained, to know that you can fight and overcome anything that is thrown your way.
The main reason is to test myself, to see what I'm capable of.
The story of why we're here and why we're doing it for breast cancer. You think life's too short and you really do have to live it, and that's why we're doing what we're doing.
154 days to go.
We haven't seen the sunshine in about a week.
You only have one life, so you might as well make the most of it.
Jesus is here!
The girls aren't going to break any records. They're actually going to establish records because this has never been done before.
Laura Penhaul. There we go. Welcome.
Thank you, mate. So yeah, it's been fascinating this afternoon to kind of see, actually, although we're from very different worlds, I'm from the world of sport and you guys are from multiple different worlds in this room, but whether it's business, whether it's brands, whether it's digital, but we kind of, the thing that I see that we share potentially is that we want to engage our audiences, whatever our audience may be. We want to understand behaviour and try and influence behaviour change. And that's something that really, really interests me as a physio. And that's why I went to Rowan Ocean, because I wanted to put myself on the other side of the table. I've always been there supporting athletes to try and achieve their goal, to help them through performance, to get to the Olympics, to get those gold medals, or whatever their goal may be. For Mark Beaumont to cycle around the world in under 80 days. Whatever it is, I will do my utmost to make sure that they can perform at their best in whatever shape or form that takes. But I've always wanted that understanding of, well, what does it take? When I've worked with Paralympic athletes, like I've always wanted to drive, like, actually, what's driven somebody who's overcome significant adversity to go on and want to achieve something major in their life? And it's always made me question. And it wasn't until I put myself on the other side could I really become familiar of what those skill sets and what those things are that we draw on when we're faced with wanting to give up. So that's what sort of drew me to kind of wanting to do the row. I wanted to do something that, one, had never been done. Two, I wasn't a rower, never sat foot in a rowing boat before. I also had never been out at sea, apart from off the beach of Cornwall. I also was going from being an endurance athlete to suddenly needing to go from a 57 kilo girl to needing to be about 70 odd kilos to put weight on, not be elite and kind of thin and athletic. So I had to eat a lot of McDonald's and crap to put fat mass on, which was interesting in itself. But I had to do loads of things that were out of my ordinary, were out of my known environment. I had to step forward into the unknown. And the biggest quote, as much as I might have rowed the Pacific or gone into an ocean, and that's what I did literally, but we all have our own ocean to cross, every one of us in this room. But you can never cross an ocean until you have the courage of losing sight of the shore. The courage to lose sight of the comfort, of the known, like the areas and the habits of what we know. You've got to step forwards into that unknown and just understand that, yeah, this transition of change, there's loads of things that are going to be risky. But how do we sort of take on that risk? How do we step into that unknown space before we even get there? And what drew me to when we were out in the ocean and all these things that when people were sort of fighting against me and saying, Laura, seriously, you tried to do this after a year, it didn't work out. You've tried again, 2 years, it's failed. Like, give it up. Like, come on, this isn't working out for you. You can't get the team together. You haven't got the funding together. Like, this isn't happening. Now, partly, yes, that's because I'm extremely tenacious and stubborn, thanks to my mum. But that sort of quality, and also significantly naive going into the Pacific, I had no idea what we were going to be facing, let's face it. But I had a real openness that I was like, well, you know what, if I've never rowed before, I've never sailed, I need to put mass on and all of these things that are very unknown. If you can go into the unknown with a blank slate, but with a mindset that is open and is adaptable to take on expert advice, then actually what can we achieve? And that's what drew me to this whole ethos of actually the adaptive mindset. It's so powerful. And I've seen it day in, day out with the people that I've worked in Paralympic sport or people that have gone through trauma. And it really sort of started to come home. And so to me, like, as I started to look into this more and more, adaptability is in us. Like, it's ingrained in us. As humans, we've evolved through the years, through our ancestry. We've had to grow and kind of we've had to adapt in order to survive. In our physiology, we adapt. Like when we get vaccines, we adapt in order to fight against those sort of pathogens. We also adapt when we go to altitude, we take processes. We adapt when we go into heat. Like it's in us. So why is it when we're faced with challenges, we don't necessarily draw on adaptability as a natural resource? But we do it when we do like face things by choice. If we're having kids, people adapt to suddenly being sleep deprived. Some people maybe adapt a bit better than others. I'm sure some of you can affiliate with that in this room. But that being said, we do it because we chose to be there. And I kind of wanted to challenge that fact of, well, why wait in order to be faced with something that's adverse? Why wait for that to come to me? So I chose to go and row an ocean, to go forwards to it and see what I learned. But it became apparent because like the people that I've worked with in the past, they've adapted through process of adversity. Whether it's like Dave Henson or Jacco von Gass, the two guys on the end, on the right side and the left side, they were blown up in Afghanistan in war by standing on an IED. Suddenly thrown an absolute curveball that they did not anticipate. Their life completely changed from then on out. That they woke up to not having any legs or not having an arm and having significant life-changing injuries. Now that's happened to other people in the same situation, but the difference between these two people is one person's woken up to say, thank God I'm alive. I want to make the most out of life. I want to go forwards. I want to just gleam everything I can do. And if that means I can become a Paralympic athlete, or I'm going to climb Everest, or I'm going to achieve the adaptive Grand Slam. Like what's changed, what's the difference between these two people to those people that the same things happened to and they wish they didn't survive. They wish they'd given up and that actually they were killed during that accident. And that difference, when I'm as a physio and I see that in different clients and different athletes that I've seen, it fascinates me because if you can untap, then you can change somebody's thought process and their behavior in somebody that wants to give up versus then actually making them believe that they can achieve. That's extremely powerful. And to me, these other two sort of good examples, those that sort of go through breast cancer, we've all got challenges that we face, unfortunately. And unfortunately, the way the world is in medical sort of ways at the moment, and also just the times have changed, like we are going to face significant challenges and how we overcome that. But it's the mindset that we face, I think, is really, really crucial. So to touch on kind of, that was my why. Everybody asked me, why did you want to row the Pacific? That's my why. It's not about, for me, it wasn't about getting on the bandwagon of expeditions and doing one thing after the other. Yes, I've always been sporty and done sort of half Ironmans or whatever, but it's been more of a physical health. Whereas this, it was because I wanted to understand what it was that we draw on when we're faced with wanting to give up. And the row for me was so pertinent to that because we weren't going to have a support boat. We didn't have a support boat. We were out there alone. We were completely needed to be self-sufficient. Like, I couldn't rely on somebody else. I had no get-out clause. Like, once we set off from shore, that was it. There was no turning back. I eliminated any element of choice. If we had a boat there, the chances are you're going to want to step on board that as soon as things get a little bit difficult. So don't give yourself a choice. Crack on and deal with it. So for me, like, that's what drove me to do this. It wasn't getting on the bandwagon. So where we went from was, as Luke said, San Francisco, aiming to Cairns. Now, those of you that are the mathematicians in the room, that will say that it should take 6 months roughly to do that. Classically, obviously, it didn't take 6 months. It took 9. So slightly misjudged on the time frame, and partly because of the time of season and those sorts of things. But we did face challenges. 10 days into the start of it, after 4 years of getting to the start line, 10 days in, and we had flooding on the boat and a fire. Not ideal when you're in the middle of the ocean with no support. But obviously, I didn't want to leave any question left unturned. I wanted to prepare for those unknown situations. But we had to make a choice at that point to then turn back into Santa Barbara, which for me at that point was one of my lowest points of the journey, because I felt like we were a pink boat of 4 women that then looked like we'd given up within the first 10 days. The very thing, pride-wise, I did not want to swallow. But I had to, for the sake of my teammates on the journey. And that's a long story, but 2 of us wanted to continue forwards, regardless of what kit we had on board, and 2 of them wanted to turn back. But those 2 that wanted to turn back were my teammates going on from Hawaii and Samoa. So I had to eliminate that risk of them stepping off the boat when we got to Hawaii. So I made that choice to turn back in. And thank God we did, because that turning back in actually was still a step forwards. There was no looking back. We continued on to Hawaii, on to Samoa, and then finished in Cairns 9 months later. But all of this would not have been the success it was if it wasn't for the team. And the environment that we were in was this. Now, it's surprising of what we adapt to, because this was our home, and this became our home, and this was our environment. Now, the thought of me now sleeping in this space and not my big double bed and having a nice clean shower would, if you asked me by choice to be there, then I'd most probably say no, I'm not going to go back there again. But I didn't give myself a choice, and this is what we were doing, and this is what we became comfortable with. So we were living, sleeping, eating, blogging, doing everything in the size of a small single bed, if that. The size of the boat itself was 29 foot. It was pretty much less than the length of this stage. And that was our environment for the 9 months that we were out at sea for. We rowed for 2 hours on, 2 hours off, constantly rotating 24/7, not sleeping for more than 90 minutes maximum at any one time. And so, yeah, that led into a few hallucinations in the middle of the night, as you can imagine. Very poignant ones, and also, not having a Scooby-Doo where we were, what we were doing. But fundamentally, all we had to do is bite-sized piece, not look at that big picture, but chunk it down. It was literally stroke by stroke. It was shift by shift. It was day by day. And by doing that, we slowly got there. That's not to say we didn't have currents that pushed us off. That was not to say that we did not have 5 hurricanes that tail ends and kind of really threw us off course, and we had to batten down the hatches. But we did get there, and this was the environment. But to survive in that environment with 3 other colleagues of mine was an interesting sort of space. You can't run away from arguments on that space. You've got to deal with it. And it's taught me so much. Like, openness, honesty, and how we communicate is so, so powerful. Because we tend to shy away from thinking we're hurting somebody else's feelings. Now, this team, everybody assumes, was friends of mine. Like, I'd put together a team that were my best mates. There's not a chance I'd do it with my best mates. I love them, but there's no way I'd live on a boat like this for 9 months. It's just interesting from how we build the characters and what we put around us. But I wanted to put together a clean slate and start from afresh to make sure that no stone was left unturned and that we never, ever sort of left a day with kind of things being left unsaid. Because to me, that was not going to be the success of our journey. So these were the girls we did that sort of achieved it. And for us, kind of how we stayed together and how we were successful, the key goal for us was finishing this journey as a team. It wasn't finishing this journey the fastest. It was not just finishing this journey. It was about finishing it as a team, which we all collectively bought into. And because of that, it meant that we shared collective values. And our values were team spirit, strength, perseverance, integrity, resilience, inspiration, and trust, which we grew heartedly together to sort of build. And we would reflect on that every week. How are we sort of holding each other to account? Are we showing strength? Are we showing perseverance? Are we trusting each other? And if we're not, what are we doing about it to make ourselves better? Constantly reviewing our processes. Now, as you can see, there's kind of more than 4 that are up there. And unfortunately, Izzy, 2 months out, wasn't able to continue for the full journey. She could only do 1 leg. So I brought 2 other girls in, Lizanne and Meg, to join us in Hawaii and then join us in Samoa. So we, again, had another step of change. But we had to just cope with that change and we had to facilitate it as best as we could. Get the girls up to speed to come into the boat that had already been out there and we'd already sort of formulated our routines. And how could we get Lizanne to feel embedded within that team as quickly as possible? And that was, again, through communication, openness, honesty. The person that's getting off the boat, sharing the difficulties that they faced, enable them to sort of engage and come in. And enabling that sort of quality time together. But that's not to say we did not face our dark times. You know, the dark times being, like I said, yes, your classic of being through storms, being battened down the hatches, being seasick for like the first 10 days and literally losing 2 stone of weight, all of those things. But in all sort of honesty, the hardest times were when we had arguments, like how you got through sort of the darker times of us interacting as a team. And I think kind of for me, like those were the times where I had to adapt the most. Where I really learnt adaptability was when kind of my viewpoint, my lens, was clearly not going to get the best out of somebody else. So I had to understand what their behaviour was, what their kind of vision was in order to try and adapt the way I approached it to get the best out of them. And that was my biggest learning curve, to sort of how I adapted my approach. And that's kind of what I've taken on to sort of how I work with my athletes now. Because kind of adaptive behaviours that we see in sport and in other worlds that I work in, I'm part of the RNLI, I'm on the shore crew down in, when I'm home in Cornwall. And you know, as much as the RNLI is a phenomenal volunteer service, it's got a process in place that it lays out and it teaches you. But you've still got to adapt to every single shout that we go on. We've got no idea what's going to happen, where they're against the rocks, where, you know, whatever we're going to have to draw on. But that collective awareness of being adaptable and just problem solving in the moment is phenomenal, and it's so powerful when you're from completely different backgrounds. But one of the couple of other stories I've put up there is I found really powerful in sport is that Bob Bowman, for instance, with Michael Phelps, is a really interesting story of actually now taking forwards kind of, we see the strength in having adaptive behaviours, in an adaptability mindset. But actually, how can we teach that? Is that something that we can influence in somebody that doesn't naturally have it? Now, Bob Bowman will talk about quite openly about some of the stuff he did with Michael Phelps, in that if he saw that he'd left his goggles before he went for a comp, he didn't run and give them to him. He told him to, you know, he left him to it. He was like, no, he's got to figure it out for himself. And when I was a coach that I work with now in British sailing, and he will specifically turn up late to certain events, or he would have forgotten something, but he does it on purpose. And he riles the athletes because he wants them to figure it out for themselves, change their own mindset, and they can be as angry as they want with the coach, but fundamentally it helps them to influence their behaviours and how they overcome something, which I think is really valuable in this time when actually what you've all been talking about today is how much do we give the consumers more and more. And obviously, as a consumer, you know, we want things to be easy. But by things becoming so easy, we're also minimizing that sort of adaptability, that kind of autonomous like behavior that we can have to actually overcome things. We're making things so easy that people are actually struggling with just day-to-day life. Unfortunately, mental health is something that's on the uprise. It's massively on. Maybe we're becoming more aware of it, or is it because we're becoming less resilient? Life, society in the Western culture is becoming so easy. We're not having to fight to survive. We're not having to adapt. I don't know the answer to that, but that's a question that I have of how can we? So where I'm at in my process of having gone through this is, how can we influence adaptive behaviours? How can I influence my athletes? And I think there's a few ways that I see in that. One is by creating false barriers. So we force people to think in a different way. We force people to sort of challenge. But sometimes that's not enough. People will step back and go, well, it just didn't work. I think there's other ways in the fact that we just don't create choice. We make it quite clean and simple, and people have to crack on with it. Like the panel were talking earlier about, this whole thing with Brexit, and do not talk to me about politics. So I'm the last person you want to ask any questions about politics. But with regards to the fact of it is what it is, and we're just going to have to adapt because we have to. We've got no decision in what's going to happen. But I think the other thing that I'm starting to see is the art of questioning. And interesting being in the house of Google where we ask questions and we get the answers back. But actually, the art of how we can make people think and challenge our adaptive behaviours or our adaptive thinking, there's a real art in how we question. And there's some fascinating books and literature that's out there all about the art of questioning. And that's something that I'm trying to draw on with my athletes, to get them to think in a different way, to think for themselves, to be autonomous. And basically, I don't want to be telling them stuff all the time. I don't want to be telling them off like a flipping teacher. When somebody goes kite surfing and then they fracture their ankle, and I'm like, well, it's got nothing to do with the sport you're supposed to be doing and you're being paid for. So why did you do that choice? Why did you make that choice? I can slate them as much as possible, but that doesn't change their behaviour. I need to get them to think in the same way as I would sort of think. But I need to adapt that. And there's a way that I still haven't nailed yet, but I think the art of education and questioning and of how we get people to think is really, really powerful. But above and beyond all of that, I think something that we all sort of share is, currently speaking, yes, we are going through a transition of change, and that will be the way that we are all the way. But fundamentally, we all have our own Pacific to cross. We all have challenges that we're going to face in, whether it's work, whether it's in politics, whether it's in life, whether we get thrown a curveball, unfortunately, that might be from a health perspective. But we all have our own Pacific to cross in any shape or form. And all I can say is I hope we have the courage to just lose sight of that shore and go forwards. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Would you like a water?
Yeah, lovely.
Let me pour you a glass of water. You deserve it.
Thank you very much.
After all that. There you go.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you very much. So I'm sure there's lots of questions, but I left the tablet on the table, so I've got to figure that out. But you said that you didn't row before.
No.
So how did you decide that rowing across the Pacific Ocean was going to be a good idea?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to do something that was completely unknown.
Take a seat.
Yeah, Grant. So for me, I was more doing as a hobby. It was like triathlon stuff. So if it was anything that was running, biking, swimming, I knew that kind of people would expect it of me. I did look into doing Ride Across America or whatever, but it wasn't really gripping me as much because I kind of knew that sport. I wanted to be a blank canvas. I wanted to see what I was going to draw on, what would sort of be a blank canvas of something I'd never done. And then I heard about ocean rowing. Somebody wanted to put a team together to do the Indian at the time. And I was like, this is perfect. I love the sea when it's on the coast.
Yeah. When your feet are on shore.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, slightly different when it's out there. And I was like, I've always wanted to learn to row. Never had the opportunity at uni because the physio was a bit intense. So I was like, great. Well, I know GB rowing, so I'll ask the coaches there to teach me to row. Might as well go to the top. I know the GB, sort of the S&C coach, so he can put some weight on me. And take it from there.
There you go. So you hadn't got any rowing experience, and I know that some of your teammates didn't have any rowing experience. So how did you go about selecting your team? Because it clearly was based on that principle.
No, the team selection was really interesting. In all seriousness, there was about 3 failed attempts, I would say. Girls that have been involved that still to this day were very influential to the process. But because we didn't have the funds and we didn't have the boat quite built yet and things like that, then things got postponed. So year by year, it ended up taking 4 years to get to start line when I thought it was only going to be 1. That's when naivety was bliss. But that being said, the final stage was when I kind of had to stop and go, okay, this is the second time round that's not been effective. How can I select a team? Because one day, and again, it comes back to asking the question, I always knew in my head that one day there was going to be a team of women that would row the Pacific, because it will just happen, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
Obviously, yeah. And I couldn't figure out why I couldn't make it happen. So it then drew me to draw on some experts. So I had to step out and go, okay, I'm clearly seeing through things through my own lens, and I'm not picking the right people, because I'm picking people that I'm getting drawn to because I feel like I think we've got a similar mindset. And in actual fact, I needed people that were different to me. So I worked with a psychologist and got him to sort of do some psychometric testing. I also brought in some ex-military guys to do some physical testing with us. So initially people applied, then they did psychometric analysis, then we did one-to-one interviews, then we did some testing down at Bisham with strength conditioning and stuff like that. Then I got them into the boat, so they did like a row over to the Isle of Wight. And then we went to, this was all over about 3 months. Then we went to the Brecons, we did a 72-hour sleep depot, where I asked the army guys to like blitz us with sleep deprivation, challenge us with decision making, change up the team dynamics, like put each of us in different leadership roles. And I said, I want it all done under cold, wet conditions and make us hungry, take food away from us. So we really did shape a bit of a brutal 3 days. But it was perfect.
Sounds perfect.
And I loved it. Yeah. But it was really ideal because it's the best way. Because I went into that thinking I knew who my team was going to be. And I was like, I've just added a few people in here to buffer it. And in actual fact, it was complete opposite. 2 of the girls that were basically struggling towards the back, Nat, one of them, she'll be open to admit, was not naturally a performer as such. Like a couple of the other girls I selected were ex-MDS athletes, so Marathon des Sables, 7 marathons across the desert. And I was like, yeah, they're definitely going to be nails. They'll be the ones that I want in the boat. And in actual fact, they weren't great team players. And it was like Nat, who was Miss Nomadic, lived a life that was a little bit spiritual compared to me. Yeah. But she was the one that was struggling at the back, but kept a sense of humour and totally kept morale up. Yeah. And I was like, crap, if she's making me laugh when I'm actually feeling quite uncomfortable, I definitely want her in the boat. I don't care about performance, because in actual fact, I can teach anybody to row, or I can teach anybody to be physically fit. But what you can't teach people as easily is that personality and that kind of encompassing and that social scene. And that's what I realised was so, so powerful, important for us.
And it was at that stage when you developed the values, the spirit. Could you remind us what spirit, those values again?
Yeah, so kind of, I really wanted something that was like an acronym that we would remember. It's always, we all know in brands and companies, we do it in sport all the bloody time, and it's like values are about, we talk about it and it's stuck up on the wall, but nobody actually knows what they are, and you don't live and breathe it. It's like, but actually, if you can live and breathe it, it can be extremely powerful. But I needed it to be something that I could remember, because my memory's not great when it's stuff like that. So I was like, but I also wanted the girls to embody it as well. So we did a session with our psychologist all about kind of values that sang home to all of us, and then kind of through an art of how he did it to sort of get it out of each of us, we came to sort of 5 key ones, and then spirit was pretty much standing out to us to be the one that it was the overarching sort of word, and then we were able to pull it out with our separate values from that.
Did you have to change it at all through the journey in terms of what it meant for you when you had 2 new people join?
No, interestingly, they totally bought into it as well. So that was good. At that point in change, like it definitely was, that was stuck, and that was what we lived and breathed by, and they shared that philosophy as well, which was great.
We've talked about machine learning and AI and all those technologies that are important in our space, but what were the technologies and innovations that you were relying upon?
Yeah, interesting. For us, purely on the boat was, your usual kind of GPS, sat-nav type stuff. Yeah. So yeah, we were working with Raymarine and had the usual kit, and then we would, so like AIS comms with other boats to sort of check, we didn't have collision risk, the normal comms with a radio, but then we had sat phone with back to good old Tony, who was talking at the end of that one. the video.
Your rock.
And my rock, yeah, he was solid. And he was the one that would send us messages on a daily basis of like, right, this is the weather, this is what's coming in, this is basically the course you need to hold. So that's kind of, we just did what we were told to do.
It's a critical piece of tech.
Yeah. That being said, I mean, we were just talking about it before, a bit like, the data that you guys gather in sport, we're always gathering data, but I just don't think we process it anywhere near as good as you lot are in this room. But we're looking at it on a pure performance of a physical performance, obviously VO2 max, heart rate, whatever. And as a physio, I'm always interested in stats from a point of view of injury prevalence and making sure we optimise availability all the time. When I was on the row, we collected research, and I'm writing it up at the moment still, 3 years later, still haven't written up. But yeah, saliva samples and our immunity profile and what happened with it in influence. So
should definitely talk to Anna about data afterwards. That's
her
thing. There's a few people asking the inevitable here, which is what did you do for the toilet?
I knew
basic
that was
technology. Because I've watched the documentary a couple of times, and there's no sight of a toilet there.
Oh, but there is. There is, if you just look for it. There's a red bucket, and I don't know if it's on any of my slides. But basically, if you watch the doco and you see a red bucket, that's the bucket of choice. And that's as much as you need to know.
Definitely watch the documentary. And I can see Lisa's waving at me in the back, but I'm going to ask one last question. What was the biggest hurdle that you had to overcome whilst at sea?
I think really that turning back after 10 days was the biggest hurdle that personally I had to face. Second to that, when we were across the equator, it was quite clear that we were massively delayed. We were 90 days on that second leg, which should have been 62. And that meant I was due to be back for British Athletics I was working with at the time, so I was due to get back to be for Rio. And we had a world champs, and I realised then I wasn't going to make it back in time. And I was really gutted because I felt like I was letting that team down, and I felt a bit compromised. So that again was another struggle.
Well, let's end on a high. What was the biggest highlight?
The wildlife is amazing out there.
Is it? Did you see any sharks?
Yeah, loads. We had Fernando and Alonso, and we gave them all names. There's a lot of things out there. Yeah, how you create humour and sort of just normal chat becomes a bit sparse.
What was your favourite? I'm sure it was. Well done. Thank you very much for joining us.